there were a couple of sessions I didn't attend, and a couple I really wanted to. And the last one, I have absolutely, well, I have a lot of excuses. I know I have a lot of excuses, but they're just that excuses. But I was, my cousins and all that, and it just slipped my mind.
You were celebrating something, so what the heck?
Yeah, I was. It was my first week out and back in public. And same with my cousins who live nearby. They're about 15, 20 minutes away. They finished with their shots too. And so we were like, yay. And I don't know, just swept up in the whole moment.
Well, now you get to get swept up in this moment.
And apologies, I really do feel I'm A, usually extremely functional, and B, I rarely forget personal engagements. Meetings, things like that. Sometimes I
no
forget
problem.
Busy, but
no problem.
So
what were some of the things you mentioned? There were a couple of
there was. I know we were talking. There was some about character creation, but I think there was some point of view in there. And
point of view.
There was also about reviews. The whole topic of reviews and whatever. You guys covered that. When I watched the videos, I was like, I would have said that.
Well, here's your chance. So, how do you decide on point of view?
Well, for me, I've always been comfortable, especially with anything novel length or even novella length, with that third person omniscient. Maybe it's laziness on my part. I don't know, but it's easier for me to control the whole scene. I think you still have options open to you, like you don't necessarily have to be a reliable narrator. I know that's easiest to do first person because you're getting first person's point of view technically. In fact, the first book I ever read where I was kind of like, oh, cool, was The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, Agatha Christie. The person narrating the book actually committed the murder, but so you can do that even in third person. It's just that it's a little less obvious, but you can do that. And like I said, I just feel a greater control. Now, on the short story side, I definitely switch back and forth. I've never done a second person. I think that just irritates my mind after a while. Even reading it, though, I don't remember the name of. It was a short story many years ago. I read it was done pretty well, but I don't work like that. But when it comes to short stories, I shift back and forth. It's very easy. In fact, it's a little bit easier just for me as a writer to write a short story from a first-person point of view. It's because it's usually an encapsulated tale, and so it feels natural for it to be that one person narrator. You're not dealing with a cast of many or lots of different venues, etc. It's like a one-act play, and those often there's so many that there's just like one person, right? On one-act play. So, and again, that's just me. What I'm most comfortable with. So,
when you brought up second person, you reminded me after our last conversation, I wanted to give a try to a short story told in second person. So
yeah, you mentioned that, and that's why I was trying to remember. But I honestly, I think it was maybe almost a good 20, 25 years ago. So I really couldn't remember. But it was a published author, and it was like it was in one of those companion collections of short stories that you could always find in a bookstore I used to love. Short stories was my favorite at one point. And I can't remember, but it was like a whole bunch of authors and there was different, contributions. And this one was done. I said, and because I had heard about it before, and but I wasn't sure until I read that short story. And it's going to bother me. But it may pop up. I actually went back and tried to look at things, like look at authors that I've read before, see if something came up.
Well, if you think about it at 2 a.m.
Yeah, I will definitely. Yeah, I definitely. So, and again, I think it was a suspense horror kind of thing. So putting you in that mode, made it kind of logical. So you can. It's more immersive. In fact, I just mentioned that word immersive. It's kind of like the way we do online games. We're so comfortable with that. Like they really are controlling your path in that game in one way or another. If you played some of these games, but you don't think of it as second person. But in a way, they are. Anyway.
As the other gamer in the group, Bertold, do you agree with that? Is that kind of a second person type experience?
You know, I never thought of it that way, but now that Richard says that, yes, that's
I haven't thought it all the way through. It just popped in my mind in a second. I was thinking I played, what was that? The Odyssey one. What was it called? Oh gosh, I can't remember the name of it, and I loved it too. It was, you know, it was this series of games they do, and they take place at different times periods, and everyone who's probably played games and listening now is probably yelling at saying, "Don't you know it's whatever?"
Is that Assassin's Creed?
Well, yeah, Assassin's Creed. Thank you. But it was they go back, and it was perfect timing for me writing, you know, Percy's story, because they put a ton of research into what the buildings looked like, and that was of course more ancient Greece, and Perseus takes place way before that even. But it was cool to just be able to go to those areas like Delphi, et cetera, and see the buildings set up. And you know, I didn't have to go back in time; they did it for me. So thank you for all that research, guys. But you know, that occurred in my mind when I mentioned that, because you are playing that character. And even though you have freedom to do this, that, the other thing, it's still a scripted, you know, it's a scripted world, and they are telling you what is happening to you in some way, and you're following through. So, you know, I got to think it through, but it is, in a way, that kind of second person narrative.
While you've been talking about this, I've been trying to think of a way to me, first person is, if you think about a piece of written fiction, there's a camera involved, you know, the point of view. And first person, the camera is inside the narrator's head. Second person, the camera is up here.
Right, homunculus.
And third person, the camera is basically all over the place. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's exactly how my mind breaks it down too. That's why I say homunculus, because in psychology, that's the concept of you are watching yourself, you
right.
know, and it's like it's the and they often, you know, diagrams like an imaginary camera back behind you. So out of
so body. I guess close third person would be the camera is held by a guy or a person who's right next to you, but they're not you.
Directing, yeah. It's well, to me, third person is also like movies. You know, I mean, you know, not all movies, obviously, because some are kind of like from the point of view. But even, do you ever notice, actually, it's the thing that bothered me in television movies, when the character dreams, they see themselves in the dream. And, but that is like a third person view. You know, you're actually also seeing yourself there and the other people, et cetera. It's like you just, you know, like I said, the camera's everywhere. It's so cut to different angles, et cetera. But yeah, that's it. And again, my comfort zone in the long form is that third person. In fact, once or twice I have attempted writing a script, and it was awful. And you would think, nah, because I really love dialogue and stuff like that. If you read my stuff, it kind of has a scripty feel to it. But the thing about true screenwriting is that you don't have the control you'd like to. You don't control the actions down to, you know, somebody scratches their face or whatever. That's the actor is going to do that. You know, you really have to bear that. And I tried a couple of times, like, cannot get out of that. So being a control freak, that's why I also like.
Well, you're clearly going to have to direct the movie also, not just write the script.
Right. Direct, star in it, and
So do either of you have any other? What were some of the other topics that we can catch up with Richard on?
I know. I seem to recall Richard had an analogy to do with cooking, I think. Am I right about that, Richard?
Doing what?
The analogy was, I need to be reminded, because I know you wrote it about it in the email, and I wrote back to you. What was it, though? It was...
I think it was an analogy between something in writing and something in cooking, I think.
All right, yeah, see if you can find the email. But let me explain about that. My whole life, I learn and process everything by analogy, to the point that when I was in graduate school, I was studying in cognitive psychology. I was looking at problem solving for a while, and I was actually trying to pull together something for a thesis on learning by analogy. You know, the classic example is, although it's not accurate, you're taught that, you know, the atom is like the solar system. You know, so you learn that you get like a framework, and so you know, I've always learned by analogy. It's one of the methods, but it's very like structured in my mind. So every time when I teach or when I hear things, I'm always thinking of analogy. And yeah, building a house, I use that one a lot. And cooking, but I know I mentioned it to you in an email. I said, you know, I don't remember what the topic was though, but I do remember that. If you could find it, that's great.
Story structure. That's what it was.
Story structure. Oh my gosh. I can't remember. All right. So if this is what I think, if this is like I have to, you know, the video, if they're talking about how, you know, when if you're talking about building your story structure, how you know, and again, I know I pants it a bit, but it does remind me a bit of cooking, because you know sometimes your basic ingredients, right? You know you're going to use this and that, and you're not sure if they're going to work, etc. And that's in one set. But then you also have there is a specific set of physical reality to cooking that you cannot escape. You know, high heat does this, low heat does that, wrong cooking does that, you know, X amount of water to flour, you know, if you're making bread, all of that you cannot escape. So you do have a lot of flexibility what you're putting together in the story, but the structure is very much like, you know, in cooking, it's not the ingredients, it's the process steps. And those are the ones that you really need to work out, because I do a lot of cooking and sometimes I will experiment quite a bit, but I always, you know, you start with the idea of, and this is where the analogy probably is coming to my mind, was you start with the idea of like, you know, what you like to write about. And you know, some concepts are popping in your head. And that's very much like thinking, what if I put raspberry with lemon and whatever, or maybe it should be blueberry and orange. But you get these ideas, but then you have to then, you know, go to work out the exact like physical aspects of your story. You have to decide, you know, where you're going to open, you know, especially, you know, when you're thinking of the story, you know, that opening paragraph, you have to pull the reader in. That's one of the most important, even the opening sentence. So you need to work that through. And again, because I do pants, I only do it at the highest level, but there still are the key ingredients of where am I starting from, where am I ending up, what are some of the key milestone points in there, and that I do lay down, because, like I said, if you don't do at least that basic structure, you're probably not going to succeed well. You're going to have to keep redoing it and rewriting like major components, and that's like cooking, because you know you do have to have some of that skill. Sorry. It's a mockingbird that always asks me for food.
Can't hear it.
Sorry, no, there's just something outside my window. I have a mockingbird that begs for food. So it just keeps doing this outside my window. Anyway, so that's it. That's what I was thinking of when we were talking about that structure. It is a play of, you know, free association, but you know, there's a certain level of writing structure that, you know, has to be worked out. You have to work that out.
I think when we talked about that, one of the things that we talked about was like the 3-act structure or something like that. Do you consciously think about things like that while you're writing?
Yes. You know, that's exactly what I mean. Yeah, that's the part you make your decision. You know, after you get your concept, that's what I'm talking about. You make that decision early on. How do you want your story to play out? And like you said, maybe the 3-act concept. I am, you know, probably because of all the reading I've done and all the writing I've done and everything I'm exposed to really has that kind of structure very often. You know, essays and even documents that I write at work. You know, you start with your beginning point, your transition, and then, to your end point. So what is that again? Thesis, synthesis, thing. I don't remember that, but there's that. But there is that whole point that you start, you want your starting point. There will be a transformation, act 2, and then act 3, you have your resolution. At the highest level. It's the lead cliffhangers or whatever, but the idea is you want and again, I admit maybe it's a little bit of laziness in my mind, but that is imprinted. And that's why also, I was thinking with the cooking, it is like that. You decide, I'm going to do slow cooking thing. So I know the rules to that. I don't know if that doesn't have to make sense to anybody, but.
Yeah, I guess with cooking, I don't really call them rules, but they're just things that if you don't do them right, your thing isn't going to turn out.
You're right. That's the point. They're not rules. You got it, Audrey. Perfect. If you don't do those things right, and again, those things are going to, I got to put this, if I'm going to bake bread, I need to do perfect, accurate measurements for the best results. If I'm going to make a stew, that's irrelevant. Measurement, it's all about taste and time. So again, if you decide your book is going to have that basic, or the book, but even a short story has that basic structure of 3-act, as an example, then certain things are going to have to apply, or you're going to lose your reader. I think. I think we've all, people who have read a lot, are now, if not consciously, but unconsciously aware of the patterns of stories. And so when it fits that pattern, they're already aboard for the ride. It's like a train ride. No, that is how my mind works,
You mentioned baking bread, and I was thinking, while you're talking, I think there's, I don't know, pantsers and plotters. Maybe there's bread bakers and just cooks in writing. Because
bakers,
but it's not. I'm sorry, I said bread baking. I meant to say baking, because when I make bread, I don't measure anything anymore. But if I make a cake, or I want to make croissants or donuts, then anything like that, you have to have exactly the right amount of baking powder to do what you want. The right amount of flour, the right amount of sugar. I never monkey with the recipe when it comes to that kind of baking. But when it comes to bread, I've made bread so many times.
Okay.
I generally know, okay, when I make my pizza dough, I know how much yeast, eyeball it, water, and then you basically just put flour into it until it gets to the right feel.
Right. And that is, that is habit and experience, right? And you can get to that, but I'm sure when you started, you did
right. But writing is kind of the same way. When you're a new writer, where's the recipe? Tell me what the recipe is. It's a scary thing to think. Okay, wait, you want me to do something and you're not going to tell me how to do it?
Yeah.
Isn't there a formula?
Well, see, there is. It's the books that you've read that you loved.
Right.
Go back and reread them now as a writer. That's what I did when I first started to think about. This is going back to high school. When I first started considering that maybe I would like to start writing, because I was just so inept at every other artistic endeavor. I thought maybe this one I can get some expression out. I started re-looking at and rereading books I had read before and thinking of what the author was doing as a writer, not just hearing the story, not just loving the characters. It was looking at actually even, the structure of the book, the structure of the paragraphs, what they decided to, if they had enough copious notes at the end, what they tossed, what they kept, whatever. So that's it. But you're right, it's not explicit, because writing, also being an art form, is much more loosey-goosey. You don't have to deal with physics and chemistry like bakers.
Right.
But that's what my advice would be to anyone starting. If you really haven't, if you feel like you've written and you just, you maybe want to go that next step, go back, look at what you loved, and start asking yourself, if I was writing this, what would I do? And people do that with movies, right? People who grow up to be directors when they first start out, they love these movies, and then they start re-looking at them, the camera angles, and the use of color and set and whatever. All those things come together from a different mindset.
But okay, what about reading craft books and taking courses? Like I noticed, none of us seem to be really fans of that approach to writing. And you know, it's just like what you said. You read a lot, and you think about what you've read and what you like, and you try to produce that kind of effect in your writing. But I have to admit, I have never, apart from reading Stephen King's On Writing, which isn't really well, it is kind of a how to do it, but not a step by step how to do it. Apart from that, I haven't read any craft books, and yet I know writers who just devour the things.
I am so in sync with you on this because I don't see what anyone sees in them. And in fact, whenever I hear, and I said this on Twitter recently, whenever I hear of a rule like people saying, "Oh, you should not have a preface. You should do this. You should that," I bristle because I do understand, as a general rule, it's very good, but if that isn't going to make your story work, it's not going to make it work. And that's the craft book.
You still have to write something that someone's going to want to read.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you follow the rules.
And if a preface works, if the preface is just, you write it with it and you write it without it, and you're like, no, I can't make this work, then that's just the way it is. But I do understand why people come up with these rules because, after a while they could become hack and you don't want people to open your book and go, oh, this again. I get that. I do get that. But it's counter for me. It's counterintuitive. This is a form of expression. It always reminds me, who tells painters that's not the way you're supposed to paint?
Yeah. Stay in the lines.
Yeah, stay inside the lines. Don't try to throw 3 dimensions in 2 dimensions, Picasso. People will never love it, or those colors are too bright. Whatever. I've always seen writing as a form of art more than anything, a storytelling art. I mentioned that in previous videos. We are storytellers, but that is an art form. So.
Audrey, you've been in like writing groups though, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been in critique groups.
Right, but not courses or
not courses.
Yeah.
I think I've taken a couple of those one day, couple hour kind of. But that was a long time ago, when I was still trying to get, traditionally published. But those things never did much for me. In fact, I find that the more how-to stuff you put in the old brain, the more paralyzing it gets.
Right.
You start to write something, and your mind says, "Oh, you shouldn't do this, and you should do that, and make sure you've got this hook thing done by paragraph 3." And in the end, you just say, "Oh, forget it. It's not going to work. I'm not going to do this." But if I start out thinking, okay, this is the kind of effect I want to produce. Like it's got to be creepy, or it's got to be exciting, or it's got to be, I don't know, nostalgic or something. Then I can actually do something. And maybe in the later stages of rewriting and editing, then it's helpful to think about some of that other stuff and kind of say, oh yeah, maybe I'm repeating this word too much, so I'll cut it out here or whatever.
And that's the kind of stuff that can come towards the end of your process, or at least midway. You start doing a structural edit to really look at, how the book is working, et cetera. But that first whole block of getting everything down from beginning to end, and that first draft at minimum, you got to free yourself first. You can always, trim and cut and reorganize and put it into or try some things. Again, because I only have the two books out there, but the first book, The Devil and the Wolf, when I wrote it, and I was pretty close to done, I just came up with the concept of the reader never having access to one of the main character's thoughts. And I liked it, although I had a lot of great scenes and great lines and humor, and I went back and looked everything out and redid it, because I had a new rule I wanted to put on the book, and I thought it would work better. I still think it did. But although it's a small point, but I went through that effort after the fact. But the first thing was to get it all out, and then I had something to work with. And that maybe is where a critique group might come in handy, because they're going to help you fine tune it. But that creative part, I just, I don't like the influence. In fact, I have a golden rule I've always used. When I'm writing my first draft, if I'm writing a comedy of any kind, which it usually is, but if I'm writing anything, I will avoid reading any book, or even sometimes watching something that is comedy, because I don't want to be influenced at that moment of creating. Once I've got that first draft out, doesn't matter. But because I don't know about you, but I tend to Zelig a little bit. Zelig, if you ever saw the movie, but I will imprint on when I'm reading, and then I get that style, and then I find out I'm writing that style. So I've got to stay away from almost everything just for that first draft, and then I could raise the
Yeah, I know what you mean by that. It's sort of unconscious. But you find yourself, you read something and you like it and you kind of absorb it, and then you go to write something and hey, look, I'm writing just like so and so. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. Yeah. By the way, I am 3/4 of the way through The Devil and the Wolf.
Oh, well,
reading. And
don't
I like it. Yeah. Yeah.
Don't tell me how it turns out. No.
You said something a few minutes ago about how important reading is to writing, and how that really, in some respects, informs how you write. Everything that you've read in the course of your lifetime. And my mom finished reading my most recent novel, and she was talking to me about it, and she said something about, how do you come up with these things? How can you? And I literally have absolutely no answer to that question except exactly what you said. I have spent my entire life reading, and that's, again, that informs how I write. If I was sitting here trying to do the math, and if I started reading when I was 5 or 6 years old, and because of the way my family was, that's what we did. It's been a little over 50 years. I'm guessing I've probably read at least 2,500 books in my lifetime. That has to be some kind of, I had to have absorbed something from that. And that's the only thing I can think of when, someone asks me, how do you do this? I've read. That's how I've done this.
At the same environment, I still remember my first Dr. Seuss book, the One Fish, Two Fish, whatever. But I'm not kidding. I remember it, even some lines in it. But I've seen on Twitter every so often someone will tweet that they're a writer and they don't read. Right. And here's the thing: I never judge, because you don't know. Right. There are people out there with just incredible talent, and you know, so I can't say. But in my mind, I can't imagine how. Like again, this is just from my frame of reference. Everything I have ever attempted to write, good or bad, whatever, if I really were able to, take that one step back, I bet you I could find the precursors in some other writers, other stories, even no matter how original, imaginative I think it is, or different. It's got to be coming from somewhere, something I've read, because I was immersed, and you are influenced by that. Again, the unconscious influences of those structures and patterns, etc., to the conscious ones. You actually say, I really love that about this book, and I would like to hopefully achieve something like that. So,
in addition, there's also your own life experiences and your own way of thinking about things. And so it's a combination of that, all the stuff you've read, and then all the stuff that's happened to you and that you've thought about. And that's why every book is unique. And of course, every reader is unique. So that's why it's really hard to have a lot of really solid rules for writing, because there's so much sort of subjectivity and shades of things that it's really hard to just say, just do it like this and it'll be perfect.
You made me think of one of those rules of writing that I try and fail. Is write what you know.
Yeah.
And it's great for some people, but my stories, when I write what I know, are so boring.
Yeah, exactly. We've had this conversation.
Yeah.
Why would anybody want to read a story about a 56-year-old boring old white man who lives in Sacramento, California, with 2 barky dogs?
I could tell you some business analyst stories that you'd never get past page 2 of.
But again, we've talked about this, and my response to that is, where's the creativity in that? That's the whole reason I write, is to get out of myself and be something else. Look at a story or look at a world from the perspective of someone that I'm not.
But the flip side, again, because I always like to do, devil's advocate. The flip side, if you're, say, John Grisham, he was a lawyer. I would mix them all up, but whatever. And, you know the courtroom. Oh no, Earl Stanley Gardner, right, with his Perry Mason series. I mean, if that's what you know, then and you write it, as long as it's so. Yeah, you can make an argument, but I think to sort of get back to Audrey's point was, it depends on your life experiences. And that's what's going to flavor it. So, and at least us, I think we more escapists, and we look to write outside of what we've experienced and what we know, or map outside. But there are those, who write these excellent, usually they're dramas, writing what they know.
Yeah. Well, you're clearly writing what you know. You are a minor Greek god, aren't you?
If only.
So I was thinking of, so you've written 2 novels essentially based on Greek mythology stories.
The first is based on Christian. The second on Greek.
See, that's how little I know about Greek mythology.
That's okay.
But is that? I mean, do you have an idea for what's next, and is it in the same vein, or are you?
Okay, it's interesting you said that. I do want to point out something about those 2 books, though, because this is in my mind, they are almost exactly opposite, even though they're both these mythological and humorous books. They're humor using mythology as its legs to stand on. But they're opposite because one is completely freeform and the other is completely constrained. So I really was looking for doing a different experience and paid dearly for it. But what I'm thinking of next, I know I owe everybody a sequel to The Devil and the Wolf, but I always promised myself that I wasn't going to do that right away. And the only unfortunate thing was I ended up with this 5-year unplanned gap after I finished the first one. But I have been thinking there's 2 different stories that have been percolating in my mind, and I would like to give one of them a try first. One is it may be comic. I have to work it out, but I actually want to do a classic whodunit. Agatha Christie, I've read every one of her books. I know that field is flooded for decades, but I was just thinking, if I could put just a unique, again, that's why I was thinking, maybe make it a comedy. I'm always comfortable with that, but just put some kind of unique spin. People do every so often a whodunit. Space, science fiction whodunit, a historical whodunit. I feel comfortable doing that. I just don't want it to be a whodunit by itself. I'd like to put a spin on it. And I do have some little concept of it. The other one was this intriguing thing I came across, and the title. It's actually probably maybe the title of the book was going to be called Chindi, Chindi. I don't care if I give the whole story away, really, because I started writing it. I had a big chunk of it. My hard drive crashed. This was 2 years ago in a horrific storm, and it took out my backup drive. So now everything's in the cloud. So I lost it, but I had enough of it, about a third along the way, that I could rewrite it without some maybe the better scenes. But what a Chindi is I don't remember if it's Navajo now. And forgive me for not remembering which Native American mythology it's out of. But the idea was they had this thing where if a person died in a manner which wasn't proper, like, they didn't have the right burial rights, etc., and their good part of them goes on, but behind is left the evil part of them. and it usually invests itself into an object. So the object is cursed. And then people around that object could become sick and die, and it's, bad stuff happens. But what occurred to me, and God, I hate to give this away publicly, but what do I? I'm not a publisher. I'm not like a.
You don't have to.
No, I do, because I write just for another. To me, what would happen if the object itself was the person's body because they died like while on life,
Support.
life, what was it?
Life support.
Yeah, like life support. They're on life support, and their body dies, but everything's still being kept kind of alive. And so the good part goes, and now this evil Chindi spirit is there, and the person wakes up. They actually had died, but now they're in, and they are the object. So I do have that, and that was supposed to be. I was trying to look for a hook for that, and what I thought was, this keeps changing, so I'm kind of almost glad the book. I'm not glad it got destroyed, but I was going to rewrite. First, it was going to be like a paranormal team that was going to get caught up in this, and now I'm not so sure. Now I think I want somebody who might be doing like studies in mythology, and ends up getting caught up in this, and takes them forever to realize what this is. And then the only way you can destroy the chin is to destroy the object. So now you're faced with this thing: do I kill this person that is alive? I mean, so yeah, so that's the story. So working on that, and with the oh gosh, I hate to say this, but I have the title. I even have a cover, but I don't have a story. I have pages of dialogue even, but I don't have an overriding plot. I have little stories, and that is going to be called probably A Wolf Among the Angels. So. And that is, it's just, so I have that, like I said, that the sequel's always been in the back of my mind, but it's lacking a really meaty plot. I've just got some subplots.
It looks like we probably only have a couple minutes left.
Really quickly, reviews for published authors in big publishing houses. Sky's the limit. Write what you want. You could knock the book, whatever. You could praise it. It really won't matter. But for the self-published authors or the small indie published authors, etc., be kind, because those ratings are all we have. And I know that may seem biased, but there is a balance. We can't just say, oh, let's go, I'll just send this off to my editor. That's $800 to $1,000 or $1,500. My book, and it does not too badly. That was maybe $40 a year I make. So we make pennies. We don't have all those resources at our hands. Just be a little more forgiving. You don't have to give a great review if you don't like it, but I would say, please, just don't pan them without thinking there's a repercussion.
Yeah.
The impact is so much greater.